Senator Cory Booker is in South Carolina today talking about extremist rhetoric and gun control. The 2020 candidate spoke at the Charleston church where 9 people were killed in a shooting back in 2015.
Because if the answer to the question, do racism and white supremacy exist, is yes, then the real question isn't who is or isn't a racist, but who is and isn't doing something about it.
Shaq Brewster joins us now from Charleston. And Shaq, some really powerful comments from Senator Booker today. Could you share more from his address?
Right. He took a very more somber tone than what we've been hearing from Senator Booker, especially when you compare it to what we've heard over the past couple of days. You'll remember it was on Sunday and Monday when Senator Booker was saying that the president was complicit in this attack that we saw in El Paso, saying that he shared responsibility for this attack because of the rhetoric that we hear from President Trump, both in his speeches but also on his Twitter feed. But today, Senator Booker really took a step back and didn't mention President Trump by name. He, of course, was in a more solemn place. He was at Mother Emanuel AME Church, obviously the location where white supremacists came in and killed 9 people in a shooting there, trying to incite a race war. And, of course, that race war never happened, but the country's still dealing with those same conversations as we go through, and the same types of shootings and hatred as we're experiencing today. So Booker was really trying to paint the picture that the gun violence that we're seeing is directly tied to the rise in white supremacy. He said those two are aligned, and he wants to take both of them extremely seriously. He said that this is a time where you have to make a choice, and you heard that in his sound just there. It's not enough to just say you're not a racist. You have to be anti-racism. He said it's time for you have to be an agent of change, and if you're not being an agent of change, then you're part of the problem. This is something that he talks a lot about outside, even before these shootings on the campaign trail, trying to get people together, trying to have a unifying message, and using this church as a way to do that today.
Shaq, obviously gun control has become a hot topic of conversation this week. It always is, but, especially in the wake of the shootings. Did Cory Booker address any specific gun control policies, and did he get into any other specific issues today?
Definitely, and I'll start with the fact that gun control for Senator Booker has been one of the key tenets of the campaign. It's something that he talks about in nearly every campaign stop, even before these shootings. I was with him in New Hampshire, for example, back in May when he unveiled this 14-point gun violence prevention plan, and he laid some of that out even today and explained some of that. His plan goes beyond what you hear from other Democrats, and his campaign manager on MSNBC earlier today said that he has the toughest gun violence prevention plan. And part of that is because, yes, he agrees that there should be a federal assault weapons ban, that those assault military-style weapons should be taken off the street. He agrees that there shouldn't be those high-capacity magazines that allow people to fire multiple times or many times without reloading. But he goes beyond that and says there should be a federal gun licensing program, having a license to carry a gun similar to what you need to drive a car. He goes beyond that and says he supports red flag laws. That's something that we sometimes hear from Republicans and even President Trump recently, but he also has limits on the amount of guns a person can buy, an individual can buy. He says we should only be able to buy 1 gun per person per month. That way it combats gun trafficking. So he laid out part of those plans and part of that proposal. He was saying that the correct way to respond to the tragedy like this is doing more than having nice words and nice comments that leaders make, but he wants action. He wants to see legislation come from this.
All right, Shaq Brewster in Charleston, South Carolina with Cory Booker. Thanks so much.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.